Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. We're getting back to the Hardy Boys, Hunting for Hidden Gold by Franklin W. Dixon. Chapter 11, Fenton Hardy's Story. Lucky Bottom was a particularly desolate place in the winter-time. It was not especially prepossessing at any season, but when the cold winds blew down from the rocky mountainsides, and when snow drifted deep in the narrow street, Lucky Bottom seemed like a deserted village. It had once been a prosperous mining camp, but one by one the mines had been worked out until now there was but one left. A few prospectors made the village their headquarters, hanging on in vain hope of someday making a lucky strike that would restore the town to its former grandeur. But the general impression prevailed that Lucky Bottom's days were numbered. There were a few gaunt, hard-bitten individuals on the station platform when the Hardy Boys got off the train. They were the only passengers that day, and evidently it was unusual for anyone to alight at Lucky Bottom, because the loungers stared at them as if they were beings from another world. "Can you tell me where Hank Shale's cabin is?" asked Frank of one of the men leaning against the station. The native shifted his chaw of tobacco, spat into the snow, and reflected. "Straight down the main street," he said. "Get to the top of that hill, and you'll find Hank's place. You can see it from here." He conducted them to the end of the platform and pointed to the top of the hill back of the collection of shacks comprising the town. The boys could see a small log cabin almost hidden by trees and almost buried in the snow. The distance was not great, so Frank and Joe, after thanking the man who had directed them, started off towards the cabin. They went through Lucky Bottom, which was nothing more than a collection of shacks and cabins ranged on either side of the wide street, and struck out up the hill until the street came to an end. There they followed a narrow path through the snow until at length they reached Hank Shale's place. Their approach had evidently been seen, because the door opened as they neared the cabin, and an elderly man with heavy, drooping mustache stood awaiting them. "You the Hardy lads?" he inquired in a piping voice. "Yes, this is Mr. Shale's place, isn't it?" Frank called. Come in, invited Hank Shale, standing aside to let them enter. "We've been expecting you this last day." The boys entered a small two-roomed cabin, typical bachelor's residence, which, however, was kept scrupulously neat. They had barely time to look around before Hank Shale led the way to the adjoining room. "Your father's in here," he said. "Come along." They followed the man into the bedroom, and there they saw Fenton Hardy laying on a small cot. He sat up in bed as they entered and held out his hand. "Hello, sons," he greeted them with his cheerful smile. "Glad to see you." When greetings had been exchanged and Hank Shale took the boys' coats and hats and began setting the table for supper, soon the cabin was red-lit with fragrant odors of coffee. While Hank was busy in the other room, the boys had a chance to talk with their father. "But how did you get hurt, Dad?" asked Frank. Fenton Hardy leaned back in his pillow with a sigh. "I cracked 2 of my ribs," he told them. "Tumbled down off a big rock back in the mountains. Now I'm laid up until the ribs mend again. I'm thankful it wasn't a great deal worse." "We thought perhaps someone had shot you." "No, it wasn't that bad. I was chasing a fellow at the time, and if it hadn't been for falling off the rock, I would have caught him. So my good friend Hank Shale insisted that I come to this cabin until my ribs set again. It isn't very serious, but it will keep me indoors for a while, and that's why I sent for you. You want us to take up the case where you left off." Their father nodded. "I'll be able to help you considerably, even if I am laid up," he said. "But what delayed you? We expected you here yesterday." The Hardy Boys glanced at one another. "You must have enemies that knew we were coming, Dad," Frank said. "They tried to sidetrack us in Chicago. We were delayed a whole day there." "How was that?" The boys then told their father of their meeting with the man who called himself Hopkins, of being locked in the compartment on the wrong train, of their fight on the road, and of their eventual return to Chicago. When they told him of their simple disguise on the trip westward, he nodded approval. When they told him of the rough-looking man who had searched the train for them at the mining village, he frowned. "Just as I expected," he remarked. "Someone must have got their hands on a copy of that telegram I sent you. The operator wouldn't give it out." "No, but they may have tapped the wires. They would know that if I sent a message, it would be to bring someone out here to help me. And this gang I have been fighting are capable of anything." "Who are they?" "It's a long story, boys. But seeing that you're going to be working on the case, I may as well give you all the information I have. This case concerns a quantity of gold that was stolen from 3 miners. One of these men, called Bart Dawson." "Bart Dawson!" exclaimed Frank and Joe simultaneously. Their father looked at them in surprise. "Yes, do you know him?" "Why, that's the man Jadbury Wilson mentioned," Frank exclaimed. "And who, may I ask, is Jadbury Wilson?" "We'll tell you later, Dad. It may not be the same fellow, but he mentioned a miner named Bart Dawson. Go on with the story, and then we can tell you about Wilson." "Well, this chap Dawson called me out here on the case and told me that the gold was stolen from them by a gang of outlaws who have been terrorizing this district for years. The outlaws are known as Black Pepper's gang." "Black Pepper? And his real name is Jack Pepperell?" "You seem to know as much about these fellows as I do," said the detective in surprise. "We'll tell you how we happened to hear about them. It's the same man, all right. Go ahead." "Black Pepper's gang stole the gold from these miners. I discovered that before I'd been working on the case 2 days. We laid a trap for 2 members of the gang, managed to capture them, and then we threatened them with imprisonment if they didn't tell where the gold had gone to. They declared that one member of the gang had deserted and had taken the gold with him. The gold was in 4 bags, and although the outlaws gave chase and finally caught this man, the bags had disappeared. Try as they might, they could not get the fellow to admit where he had hidden it. He denied the theft utterly, said he had seen nothing of the gold, and that night he escaped. The outlaws were of the opinion that the gold had been hidden somewhere in a deserted mine shaft. That was the story the 2 rascals told us, and it was while I was checking up on his story that I was attacked by Black Pepper himself. I managed to fight him off and disarm him, but he got away, so I chased him, and it was while I was chasing him that I fell off the rock and cracked my ribs." "And that's how the case stands now?" "That's how it stands now. I don't know whether to believe the 2 outlaws we captured or not. They may have been telling the truth. The gold may have been stolen by the chap who deserted them. They said he later escaped from them, and that they thought he had probably gone back to where he had hidden the gold and made away with it. In that case, there wouldn't be much chance of getting it again. It's that circumstance that makes me suspicious of the story. If the deserter had recovered the gold and cleared out, and the outlaws would likely give up hunting for it, and they would certainly give up bothering me. But they're still in the vicinity, and I have an idea they know just where the gold is and are waiting for a chance to get their hands on it. I think this story about the chap deserting from the gang and making away with the loot is false. They just wanted to throw me off the trail and probably thought I'd give up the case and go back east, leaving them to a clear field." "What's your theory about the gold?" "I think they know where it is, all right. They have it hidden away safely, but they don't dare remove it. They'll wait until the affair dies down, and then they'll probably separate and leave this district, meeting somewhere else to divide the loot. Our problem is to find the gold." Fenton Hardy looked steadily at his sons as he said this. "I have a lot of confidence in you. he went on. "It just requires a lot of hard work and keeping your eyes open. Mainly, it will keep the gang on the jump. They'll know we haven't given up the case, and they'll be afraid to do anything. And now," he said, "you might tell me how you happened to hear the names Bart Dawson and Black Pepper before." Frank and Joe then told their father of their meeting with Jadbury Wilson, the old miner who said he had once lived in Lucky Bottom. They deemed it best not to mention the fact that Jadbury Wilson suspected Bart Dawson of stealing from him. If Bart Dawson were back in Lucky Bottom, they felt safer in reserving this bit of information. They merely told their father that Wilson had mentioned the name of Dawson and Black Pepper, among others, as having lived in Lucky Bottom at the time he had been a miner there. "What kind of chap is Dawson?" asked Frank. "One of the finest," declared their father promptly. "He's a real square shooter, as the miners would say. The loss of the gold has broken him all up. He told me he had hard luck all his life, and now that he had a fortune within his grasp, it was heartbreaking to lose it again." Frank could not help thinking that life had evidently paid back Bart Dawson in his own coin. He had stolen a fortune from Jadbury Wilson after Wilson had endured hard luck for years, and now he was getting a taste of his own medicine. Still, it seemed strange that Fenton Hardy should be so convinced of Dawson's honesty if he were the type of man who would rob his own partners. "Come and get it," piped Hank Shale from the next room. "That's the supper call," laughed Mr. Hardy. "You must be hungry after your journey. Better go and eat. Hank will bring me mine in here." Nothing loath, the two boys went into the combination living room and kitchen, where Hank Shale was already dishing out piping hot beans and stew from the enormous pot. What with huge slabs of bread, thickly buttered, and excellent coffee, the boys sat down to their supper with a will. They ate off 10 plates and drank from 10 cups, but they agreed that no meal could have tasted better. Even the food of a dining car on the train, exquisitely cooked and served, though it had been, seemed somehow to lack the flavor of this meal in Hank Shale's mountain cabin. Hank, like most men who had lived a solitary existence, was a silent man. He said nothing throughout the meal, but as he watched the boys eat, and as he responded to their request for second helpings, a slow smile crept over his wrinkled face. "That's the best meal I ever ate," declared Frank emphatically, when he had cleared his plate for the second time. "Me too," agreed Joe. "Glad you liked it," said Hank Shale, deeply pleased. Chapter 12. The Cave-In. Next day, refreshed by their night's sleep, the Hardy boys set out on a systematic search for the hidden gold. "There won't be much real detective work about this case," their father told them. "It will be just a plain case of plugging along and searching high and low for that gold. It is hidden somewhere, or the gang wouldn't be staying around. Hunt in all the abandoned mine diggings, in any place where it might possibly be hidden. You may follow that line, or you may try to find where the outlaws are camping and possibly pick up some clues there." With this to go on, Frank and Joe Hardy left the cabin in the morning. They decided to explore some of the abandoned diggings first. "It's like hunting for a needle in a haystack," said Frank, "but we might have a bit of luck and stumble on the gold." They did not go down into the town because they knew that their presence in the camp would cause considerable talk, and although they had little doubt about the news of their arrival had reached the outlaws by now, they preferred to remain under cover as much as possible. Hank Shale had suggested searching the workings of the old mine just over the brow of the hill, and towards this place they went. There was a faint trail through the rocks, although it had long since been snowed over. But the boys managed to find the workings without difficulty. They felt the exhilaration of the clear, cold air and the excitement of at last being at work on the mystery of the hidden gold. The abandoned mine did not look very much like a mine. It was just a large pocket in the earth, with a shaft that sank down into the darkness. The shaft was but a few yards across, and a rickety ladder had been led down into the hard rock. "We may as well try this one for a start," suggested Frank. "We can easily tell if anyone has been around recently." They had brought electric flashlights with them, and without further ado, Frank began to descend the ladder. Joe followed. Their descent into the abandoned mine was precarious, as at various places the rungs of the ladder were broken. But after descending about 40 feet, they came to the first and only level. The mine had evidently been a failure. In the light of the flashlight, they saw that they were in a rocky cavern about 200 feet in length. Not a great deal of work had been done in the mine, and it had evidently been abandoned years before. The boys found the cavern extremely cold and damp, and they made haste to explore it. When they had almost completed the circuit of that place, hunting carefully for any signs of the recent removal of rock, for any place where the stolen gold might possibly have been hidden, they were of the unanimous opinion that no one had been in the place since it was originally deserted. There was not the vestige of a hiding place. The abandoned working was but one of many in that locality. One lucky strike in the neighborhood having sent other miners into a frenzy of excavation on their respective claims. It had been worked for a short time and then left to its fate. "I don't think there's anything here," said Joe. "I'm sure of that." "Oh, well, we couldn't expect to find the gold right off the bat. There are lots of other mines to search yet, and most of them plenty deep." "Think we should go back?" "Just a minute. There seems to be a passage here." Frank's light had revealed a narrow opening at the extreme end of the cave. He bent down and examined it more carefully. "This seems to lead somewhere," he said. "I think I'll follow it." He crouched down and made his way on hands and knees into the passage. Joe waited until he had disappeared and then called after him. "I'll wait here. If it leads anywhere, I'll call you." Joe could hear his brother scrambling along through the little corridor in the rocks. After a while the sounds died away. It was dark and lonely in the cavern in which he stood. He waited for Frank's summons to follow. After 5 minutes there was still not a sound from the opening into which his brother had disappeared. Joe began to get anxious. He knelt down and flashed his light into the interior of the passage. There was no sign of Frank. "I wonder if anything has happened to him," he muttered. When another 5 minutes passed, and there was still no sign of his brother, Joe decided to invade the passage himself. Anything might have happened. Frank might have been overcome by poisonous gases in the depths of the mine. He might have tumbled down some unseen pit and hurt himself. Flashing the light ahead of him, Joe crawled into the narrow corridor in the face of the rock. For several yards the passage extended directly ahead, and then there was a turning. Examining the corridor, Joe saw that it was not a natural opening in the rock, but had been constructed by human hands, for the marks of the pick and shovel were plainly visible. It had been blasted out of the rock, and for a short distance the dimensions of the passage were of good size, but gradually they narrowed. He had just gone past the turn in the tunnel when he heard a faint shout. "Joe! Joe!" It seemed to come from a long distance, and there was a note of appeal in it that told the boy his brother was in danger. Scrambling on through the tunnel that seemed to open before him in the vivid circle of light, he made his way towards Frank. He heard the cry again, and this time it was louder. He shouted back, "I'm coming! What's the matter?" "I'm trapped here. My foot's caught." On through the gloomy tunnel Joe went. At last the light revealed the form of his brother some distance ahead. Frank was laying flat on the rocky floor of the passage, with his foot caught in a crevice between two heavy boulders. He had tried to climb over them. One rock had evidently become dislodged, pinning his foot against the other. "Are you hurt?" asked Joe anxiously, as he reached Frank's side. "No, I'm all right, but I can't move my foot." Joe put down the flashlight so that its glare clearly illuminated the scene. Then he went over to the boulder and exerted all his strength to move it, but the boulder was heavy. Had it struck Frank's foot directly, it would have shattered it to a pulp. Fortunately, it had merely slid into position above the other rock, pressing against the boy's ankle and imprisoning his foot in the crevice between. Frank was unable to lend his brother any assistance. He was laying face downward and was unable to rise to a sitting position. "It's mighty heavy," panted Joe as he strove to move the heavy boulder. It refused to budge. "Rest a bit and then try again." Joe sat down, breathing heavily. "How did it happen?" he asked. "I was crawling along through the tunnel when I saw this pile of boulders ahead. At first I was going to turn back, but I thought that when I had come this far it would be foolish to turn around, so I started to climb over the boulders. Just as I was almost over, that big boulder slid down against the other one, and there I was. Lucky I didn't break my leg. I'm afraid to move that boulder the wrong way, or it might roll over onto you. There's only one way to move it safely, and that is to lift it straight up, just enough to release your foot. But I'm afraid I'm not strong enough. Try it again anyway." Again Joe applied himself to the heavy rock. Although he strained and gasped in his efforts to move it, the boulder defied his efforts, and he was unable to budge it an inch. He made attempts after attempt, but it soon became evident that the effort was beyond his strength, and at last he was forced to sink back, exhausted, against the wall. He mopped his brow. "Too heavy," he declared, out of breath. Frank was silent. "If we only had a crowbar of some kind," he suggested at last. "It wouldn't be hard to move it then." Joe looked up. "Why, I saw a crowbar back in the mine," he exclaimed. "It will be the very thing. Go back and get it. You'll be able to move the boulder away without any trouble, and then we can clear out of here." Joe picked up his flashlight and turned to retrace his steps into the main workings of the mine. "I'll only be a few minutes," he promised. "Don't worry about me. I won't go away," said Frank with a laugh. He could be cheerful even in a dangerous situation. Back down the narrow tunnel crawled Joe, back towards the cavern in which they had first descended. He remembered having seen the long iron bar laying at the foot of the shaft, and he realized that it would be an ideal lever for moving away the boulder that imprisoned his brother. He made haste, not wishing to leave his brother too long imprisoned, and in a few minutes he was back in the great cave. At first he could not find the iron bar, and he hunted about, flashing the light here and there into dark corners. At last he found it near the foot of the shaft, and it was quite heavy. At one end of it lay beneath a heap of rocks. Joe tugged at the iron bar. At first it resisted its efforts. He put all his strength into the attempt, and the bar slowly moved. A final tug, and it came free so suddenly that he staggered backwards. It was this circumstance that saved his life, for in extracting the bar, he had dislodged the mass of rocks. With a rush and a roar, they came tumbling down across the bottom of the shaft. Had Joe been standing beneath it, he would have been crushed to death. Then, before the clattering had died away, came a sullen, hollow roar from the higher up in the shaft. Timbers snapped and crackled. The old boards, long since rotting away, suddenly gave beneath the pressure of the rocks and the earth. An avalanche of stones descended into the shaft and on top of the first downfall of rock. More followed. Showers of earth came rushing down, and a cloud of dust pervaded the cavern. Joe leapt back. Then with a roar like thunder the entire shaft caved in. Rocks and timbers came tumbling down with a terrific crash. The air was filled with noise of smashing timbers and falling rock. The faint light from the shaft that had given some vague illumination to the cave was blotted out. The mine reverberated with echoes and shook with forces of crash. Silence reigned. It was broken by the sharp sound of falling pebbles that descended in the wake of the avalanche, and then those noises too died away. The cavern was filled with choking clouds of dust. Joe was almost stupefied by horror. He realized, too, the full peril of the situation. The shaft was caved in. He thought, "We're trapped in the mine. We'll never get out alive." He turned his flashlight on the place where the shaft had been. The light revealed only a high sloping hill of rocks and shattered timbers. The shaft was completely blocked. It would take an army of men to clear away the debris. Joe realized that he and Frank would never be able to accomplish the task, and he knew there was no hope of assistance from outside, for no one knew where they were. It might be days before they were traced to the mine. And we will continue this story next Friday or Saturday. Thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.